Hello everybody and welcome to the Whiskey Dictionary. Today I'm going to be talking to you about Pabst Blue Ribbon's 5-second aged whiskey. Now if you are not normally a person who watches whiskey reviews on YouTube, awesome. This is the video for you. I'm going to condense my normal format so this could be a fairly quick video and you can find out whether this is just a total cash grab or if it's actually something worth getting. So let's first start off with PBR though. PBR as a company is Pabst Blue Ribbon. It's an American beer company and they've been around for about 175 years if you consider their entire history of this guy named Jacob Best who started a beer company called Empire Brewing with his sons. Just the idea of starting a brewery with your kid is kind of like Americana as far as I'm concerned. That's an American dream and I love it. So about 50 years go by, company ends up changing to Pabst Blue Ribbon, so they've been celebrating this 125-year celebration, anniversary, I guess you'd call it, for a few years. And this is one of the results of that celebration. Another one was coffee, and there's a few more on their website if you want to check it out. So why make this? Well, the idea was that Jacob Best had access to a bunch of different grains at the time, and brewing and distilling whiskey are very similar. To put it a little bit coarsely, whiskey is beer with extra steps. So you'll see occasionally brewers will end up going and making their own distillate, and distillers will end up going and making their own beers just as a way to kind of stretch themselves a little bit. So it's not uncommon to have seen this happen. But they wanted to make sure that they went with grains that Jacob would have access to. Just so happens that they actually picked a really good mash bill, which is another word for the stuff in whiskey, that honestly I would normally like to drink. This is 52% corn, 27% malted barley. Malted just means that they allowed the grain to start growing before they killed it in a kiln, and what that does is it ends up creating sugars. So you've got 17% wheat and 4% rye. So that's actually a really good sounding mash bill as a whiskey person. And they bottled it at 40% ABV, which is the lowest that you can do to call something a whiskey, so that's fair. And the whole 5-second age thing. So let's talk about that. 5 seconds is obviously not enough time to have any impact whatsoever on a whiskey. But what happened is the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Trade Bureau, the TTB or whatever they call themselves, they dictate what whiskey rules there are for America. And in this case, going back and forth with PBR about exactly what they could do in order to call it a whiskey, it comes out that all that America requires to call something a whiskey is for it to touch oak. So what they did is they actually rigged up this contraption that allows for 5 seconds of contact time between the distillate, which is the whiskey essentially before it goes into the bottle. 5 seconds, comes right out the bottom of the barrel, and they're good to go. They bottle it right after that. So there you go. That's why 5 seconds. It's kind of I don't want to say spitting in the face of the law, but it's definitely making a little joke of it. Compass Box, in fact, which is a Scotch brand that does blends, did a very similar thing, a little different, but same idea, where they did a 3-year aged whiskey in order to prove that you do not need to be super old in order to be good. Of course, they put super old stuff in there and then it's a whole other thing. I'll probably do a video on that in the future. Anyway, so let's talk about this whiskey and why it came to be. If you look at the label, you'll see that there aren't a whole lot of frills to it, but neither is there with the normal beer, so it kind of makes sense that the label would look this way. However, when it was discovered that PBR was going to be creating a whiskey, the internet went nuts, and they really wanted it. And that's why part of me feels like this whole thing was just kind of thrown together. Maybe somebody leaked this label to see if it was even going to stir up any sort of conversation, and when it did, there you go. You could just produce whiskey. I mean, honestly, you can make whiskey very quickly if you're not aging it. So it makes a lot of sense to me that this might have just been an experiment to see if people wanted to get it. But anyway, let's go into the whiskey. Now, I've done 2 things here. I have this whiskey here, which I've had sitting out for a while, because oftentimes when you pour a whiskey, you're going to get a lot of alcohol fumes. You're going to get kind of unpleasant nose or smells. So I left this one out for probably about half hour or so. And I'm going to pour a new one. I have not had a ton of this. I actually just got it in the mail today, but I wanted to be able to formulate my opinion kind of live on YouTube with you guys. All right. By the way, I do appreciate the fact that they bothered to do a synthetic cork, or a cork at all. There's plenty of others that do twist-offs, and they certainly could have gotten away with it, so good on them. All right, let's go ahead and smell the one here that I just poured. Okay, well, I'll tell you, it is not bad. I will be perfectly honest. I did not have high hopes for this whiskey. Just in general, it feels gimmicky. Everything about it feels gimmicky. And I was expecting a heavy alcohol burn, even with the low ABV. I've had some pretty rough White Dog before. So anyway, let's go ahead and nose this again, and I'll give you guys a little bit of notes here. So kind of like a lemony nose for sure. I was actually nosing this just a couple minutes ago before I started filming this, and letting it sit out for a little bit actually will improve the nose as far as I'm concerned. I got a lot more right off the smelling it from this one. But some of the things to look for if you're doing this along with me is right out of the bottle, like I said, lemon, right? This one over here, I'm getting a lot more. I'm getting grass. Kind of reminds me a little bit of gin without some of the crispness, and actually spruce. So if you're familiar at all with camping or going out, especially in New England, I'm not sure how far spruces go, but it definitely reminds me of this tea I used to make. I would just take spruce off a tree, throw it in some boiling water, let it sit for a little bit, and I used to make tea out of spruce, and it was very good. So anyway, that's a little bit on the nose for me. Overall, like, not crazy, but there's something there, which is great. So let's go ahead and taste this. Cheers. Okay, well, let me start off by saying that they do not say that this is a sipping whiskey, and that's fair. It's not. Virtually no moonshines or whiskeys, in this case, are supposed to be sipped. They're there to show you what the distillate comes out of at the still at a brewery. For example, Buffalo Trace has a version of White Dog. A lot of people love Buffalo Trace products. If you've ever heard of Pappy Van Winkle, that's from them. So it makes sense to do something like this for a big distillery where people want to see what's coming out of the stills. This doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but let's talk about the way it tastes. So for 40%, there is a high burn of alcohol, which you're gonna get that in a White Dog. There's absolutely no cutting, there's no mellowing, there's no nothing going on from the barrel. Let me try another sip here though. So again, you're getting a little bit of the gin flavor without, again, the crispness. Now, I really hope that you guys know what I mean when I say that. If you don't, go pour some gin. And that feeling that you get after the initial sip, that's what I'm talking about. It's just kind of like a light, but it's got like a bold back. There's that on this, and I like that. There's some more of that spruce in here. And almost like a juniper, well, juniper berries would make sense with the gin. Not a lot going on, which there shouldn't be. You're not impacted by the barrel yet. However, altogether, not terrible. Now, they do say not to drink this straight. So I thought to myself, what can I do? They suggest doing an old fashioned. I didn't have any oranges around to muddle. So instead I decided to do a highball. So, sorry, the ice has melted since I started filming. So I'm gonna do a highball, which is essentially 2 ounces of whiskey. That was probably about 1.5 ounces. I'm gonna give it just a little splash more. And then some seltzer. Hopefully this doesn't overflow. I'm trying to do it quick for you guys, as I mentioned. All right, so let's just kind of swirl it around a little bit and give it a sip. Cheers. So the White Dog does actually come out pretty heavily in there. If you decide to do this yourself, I'd probably go a little bit less than 2 ounces, although that was what was suggested by PBR. I disagree. Maybe go about 1.25. That is not a bad drink. This is not nearly as bad as I expected it to be. I don't know. I gotta tell you, I think the price of this is for me personally, it cost me $33, but I got it shipped to my house. I think it's about $25 if you see it in the store. It's better than it has any right to be. If this is something that interests you whatsoever, go ahead and give it a shot. But just remember that there's a lot better things to spend $25 on if you're looking to buy whiskey. And you can check out some of those things. I'll link you up there just so I don't have to go into it. Good job, PBR. I'm honestly surprised. I'm not thoroughly impressed, but I'm very surprised that it's not terrible. So I guess good job. I hope I don't sound like a jerk with that, but I mean, I think you guys are probably on the same page as me, where you probably expected this to be pretty bad, and it's just not. So good job. Thank you for joining me here on the Whiskey Dictionary, and I hope you check out some of my other videos. I'll put up a couple here so you can check them out if you're trying to get into whiskey. So have a great rest of your day, and cheers.